So we're going to start with Module 1 in Geometry. We're going to talk about the basics of geometry to start with in this first module. This can give you some base knowledge that we're going to be using throughout the school year. So we're going to start with some definitions. So first we're going to define a point. And a point is simply a location. And it is drawn as a dot and named by a capital letter. So for example, we have point A, we can also have another point, point B. And then the words and symbols, you usually just say A or B for points. There's really no special symbol for it. So A, B, they are points, just represented by capital letters. Next, we want to talk about a line. And a line is made up of points. It's made up of an infinite number of points, and it has no thickness or width. Now, when we draw lines, they look like they have a thickness or width, but that's just because we're putting it on paper. They don't actually have thickness or width. They are drawn with an arrow at each end. Since they go on infinitely, there's really no end point to a line, so we use arrows to let us know that they keep on going. They are named by the letters representing 2 points on the line or a lowercase script letter. And they can be any 2 points on the line. If there's 3 or more points, you can pick any 2 to name the line. So points on the same line are said to be collinear. That means they fall on the same line. So I'm going to go ahead and draw an example. So we're going to call this, we have a couple different ways we can name our line. So we have our line, it has points A and B on it, and I'm also going to use a script letter. So one way I could name this line is line L. So that lowercase L lets me know I'm talking about the line, or I can use 2 points on the line. So I can use AB with the arrows overhead to let it know it's a line, or I can name it BA. The order of the letters does not matter as long as both points are on the line. So all 3 of these represent the same line in naming. So our last definition for this section is a plane. And a plane is a flat surface made up of points. So again, all of these are made up of points, just an infinite amount of them. It is drawn as a shaded 4-sided figure and is named by a capital script letter. So while lines are named by lowercase script letters, planes are named by capital script letters, or by the letters naming 3 non-collinear points. So if collinear means they are on the same line, non-collinear means they aren't. So you have to use 3 points that aren't on the same line to name a plane. And then points that lie on the same plane are said to be coplanar. So you can have 3 points in the same plane that aren't collinear. That doesn't mean they're not coplanar. So go ahead and draw an example, and I'm not going to shade in the planes, but I am going to draw my 4-sided figure here to represent my plane. I'm going to use a capital script letter, and I'm also going to put 3 points in this plane as well. So we have our 3 points in our capital letter. So one way I could name my plane is capital letter, script letter M, or I can list those 3 points. And it doesn't matter the order I list my 3 points, so I can call it ABC, I can call it BAC, CAB. I mean, there's a lot of different ways as long as you pick 3 non-collinear points. But ABC is probably the simplest way to name that plane using letters. But both of these represent the same plane. So now let's go ahead and look at some examples. So in our first example, we're going to use this figure to answer some questions. So we want to name a line that contains point P. So if I find point P is right here. And I'm just going to go ahead and use the easiest way to name that line, which is by its script letter. You can use 2 letters if you want. It's line N. Point P is on line N. Next, we want to name the plane that contains lines N and M. So let's find our 2 lines. So here is line N, and here is line M. So the easiest way to name a plane is by its capital script letter, which when I find it is the F. So we're going to call this plane F. And again, as long as you use 3 non-collinear points, that also can represent the plane. Next, we want to name the intersection of lines N and M. So again, if we looking at lines N and M, I want to look where they intersect. And there's only one point where the lines intersect, and that is point R. Next, we want to name a point not on a line. So we're looking for a lone point all by itself, which would be right here, which would be point W. We can call W our point not on a line. Now we want to come up with another name for line N. So remember, another way to name a line is pick any 2 points on that line. So let's go ahead and get rid of all of the other highlighting and just identify our line N. So here is line N. So as long as I pick 2 points on the line, it doesn't matter which 2, that will name my line. So I can use PS, that's another name. There's actually like 3 different ways you can name this line other than line N, but we'll use PS. You can also use RS or PR. That is also a way to name the line. So there's 3 different ways, even though it only asks for 1. And the last thing we want to know is, does line L intersect line N or line M? So we already have line N highlighted. We find line M, and then we have line F, which is line L, which is down here. And we want to know, does it intersect? And the answer would be no. And for our explanation, we would say because there is no point on all lines. So there is no point that is common between all 3 lines. Lines N and M have point R in common, so they intersect, but T and U are the only points on line L, and they don't fall on either of the other 2 lines. So next we want to draw some figures representing some relationships. So our first example, we want point T that lies on WR, and WR represents a line. So let's start with drawing our line. That has W and R on it, and we want point T on there as well. And it doesn't matter where we put point T as long as it's on the line, so I can put it closer to W, I can put it closer to R, I can put it on either side, as long as point T is on the same line. Next, we want to have AB intersecting CD in plane Q at point P. So there's a lot going on there. So let's start with the first thing. Let's draw our plane Q. So we have our plane Q. We also have 2 lines A, B, and C, D, which intersect. So we can draw one line with A and B on it, and a second line going through it, which has points C and D. And then their intersecting point, right here, we call point P. And again, there are multiple ways you could have drawn this image as long as it contains all of this information. So our last example, we're going to use the image to answer 4 questions. So first we want to know how many planes appear in this figure. And it looks to be there is just 1. We have plane S, so there is 1 plane. Okay. Next, we want to name 3 points that are collinear. So we have to identify a line that has 3 points on it. So if I look, I'm trying to look for 3 points. The only line I see is this line right here that contains 3 points. So our 3 points that are collinear are A, B, and D. Next, we want to know if points A, B, C, and D are coplanar. So that means they lie in the same plane. So let's identify where those points are. So we have point A, B, C, and D. And if I look, point A and point D don't actually fall in my plane S. So the answer is no, because points A and D are not in plane S. And the last question, at what point do DB and CA intersect? So those are lines. So if we highlight our lines, so we want line DB, so DB, and line CA, we want to know when they intersect. So remember, the 2 points are on the line, so it represents the whole line, not just that section. So I can actually extend these highlighting. So if I look, the point where they intersect is point A. So even though I didn't use point A to name line DB, it is still on that line. So we have one last example. So we want to complete our figure using the following relationship. Lines A, B, and C are coplanar and lie in plane Q. Lines A and B intersect at point P. Line C intersects line B at point R, but does not intersect line A. So there's a lot of information going on there, so we want to break it down. So let's start with the fact that lines A and B intersect at point P. So if I draw 2 lines in my plane Q, use my script letters to name them. So we have A, and we'll call this line B. And we know their intersection is at point P. So here's where they intersect it. We'll call that point B. Next, we have line C that intersects line B, but does not intersect line A. So I'm going to draw my third line, C. Use my script letter. And then its intersection with line B is called point R. And lastly, just make sure they're all coplanar and lie in plane Q, which they do since they're all within my plane. And we have our figure. So hopefully this gives you a good start into geometry, and just know we're going to be using these relationships throughout the school year.